right, Dave, thank you very much for doing this. This is world famous artist Dave Dorman. Dave, why don't you talk a little bit about what you're working on right now? We'll start out with that, and then I want to get into a little bit of the backstory.
Sure. Well, what I'm working on right now, and right now is a big question because I do a lot of stuff all at once. I just finished a couple of weeks ago doing some trading cards for Upper Deck for one of their new Marvel card sets. It's going to come out next late spring, early summer. I'm going to be doing another painting for I forget the name of the publisher. They're doing the Frank Frazetta comic books. So I'm doing a cover for them, another cover. I just did a private commission for another client. I'm doing another cover for something I can't talk about. It's sort of kind of fun, you know. And then just a lot of private commission stuff. I'm doing a lot of Star Wars, small drawings and paintings for fans as private commissions, and then the occasional thing for myself when I get some time.
Are you still doing a lot of Star Wars stuff? I saw that George Lucas, he bought some weird stuff, and like they voted you as like their favorite Star Wars painter. You won like some massive award for that.
Yeah, that was back when Dark Horse was publishing the books back in the 90s and 2000s. I was doing a lot of cover work for them, and I really had a lot of fun with those projects. And I got a lot of fandom behind me, and really liked the work that I was doing, and Lucas liked the work that I was doing, and so that really rose my popularity, within the Star Wars fandom. And at one point through Star Wars Insider magazine, no, Star Wars Galaxy magazine, they voted me, best Star Wars artist. There's a lot of artists out there, so it was a nice honor to have, and I've still been doing it here 40 years later. I'm still doing Star Wars artwork. I really love it. I love to be in that universe, and it's fun. It continues to be fun after all these years.
Do they have it probably got more diverse now that George Lucas sold the franchise, and are you dealing with all different people now? Has it changed a lot for you?
Yeah, the people that I was working with back when it was Lucasfilm, they all sort of changed over the years, and I don't have any contacts at Lucasfilm directly anymore. I've done a little bit of work, for Lucasfilm through Marvel, but since Disney bought them, I haven't done any work specifically, directly with them. Although I'm still doing drawings and private commissions of the new characters, Ray and Kylo and all of the new fun characters that they've come out with the sequels. So it's not like
BB-8 is that pretty popular? Yeah.
I've done some BB-8. I've done some of the other droid from what's the name of that funky little droid that was in the animated show? No, I can't remember. Anyway, yeah. So I'm still connected with Star Wars, even with the new characters, and it's still fun to do it. They designed the galaxy, really nicely. The people who continue to work with Lucasfilm and work with Disney continue to come out with some really fun character designs and characters, ships, and worlds to build on. So for me, it just adds more to the fun.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about Star Wars is their world building, like all the crazy creatures and all the ships and everything going on. Really, epic story. Yeah. I think.
Yeah, and they keep it visually consistent, which is nice. And with all the new shows, there's something new to add to it.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so it always keeps you invigorated and interested and like challenged.
Yeah, it does. I really enjoy it. Although, sometimes, the world is so big. The Star Wars, galaxy is so big. I can't keep up with everything. So, when I go to shows and people talk about it, especially with the books, with the novels, I don't read the novels because I just don't have time to stay up with that. But I watch the videos and the Disney Plus and the films and stuff, so I can talk pretty fluently with that. But people ask me questions about characters from the books, and I'm just lost. I wish I had time to keep up with everything, but um, you know, as long as they like the art, that's really the important thing for me.
No, yeah, yeah. Well, obviously I love your art. That's why I'm talking to you right now. But I really blew my mind. The first thing I saw about you was you did a cover for the Rocketeer, and I don't think too
Right,
many people were buying the Rocketeer at that time. But I think you did number two, where this giant hand
right,
is holding the Rocketeer. I was like,
sure.
that blows away most comic covers that I've seen. Like at that point, people weren't
Thanks.
doing full on painted comic covers.
Not a whole lot back in those days. The independents were doing it a little bit more frequently because they could take the chance to try to stand out a little bit more on the comic stand. Just the look of a painted cover as opposed to a flat comic style cover that was in those days. Marvel and DC had tried some painted stuff, but most of their artists were line drawing, pen and ink, and then flat coloring. But Dark Horse and a couple of the independents, were willing to take that chance, and so it was very fortunate for me that I was sort of right there at the right time, especially with Star Wars and Indiana Jones. When those came out and then eventually hit really big. But Dave Stevens, who created the Rocketeer, was a good friend, and I've known him for years, and he's a fairly good painter himself, and so it surprised me when he called and asked me if I'd collaborate with him on that cover for Rocketeer number two. And I said, absolutely, any chance to work with, a friend who is just a wonderfully talented artist, I jump on. So that was really a fun project to work with Dave, and he really liked it a lot. It was a great cover, and then Rocketeer went on to history, making movies and doing well. So it eventually worked out.
I think he's a really good illustrator. I think I read at one point that he didn't manage to put out much comic book stuff. He was so busy with his commercial illustration career.
Right. He had a career that most people in the industry, comics field, knew him from doing comics, but he was doing animation, he was doing storyboards, he was doing pre-production artwork and all sorts of different things out in LA, which is where all that stuff done. So I've never lived out there. I've always sort of been freelance from my house in Florida or the Midwest, and so I never got involved in a lot of that type of work.
Where do
But
you live currently?
currently, I live outside of Chicago.
Okay. Do you like that better than Florida?
No, I yeah, Florida. I lived for 25 years in Florida. I've always been freelance. I've never worked for specific company, although I've had long-term, projects like, when I was doing, Dark Empire and Crimson Empire. I do chunks of covers at a time, but I've never worked under contract with any company. It's always been freelance. So for me, I just didn't want to live in New York or LA. Even here in Chicago, I'm way outside in the suburbs, so I don't have to deal with city stuff. But I don't deal with any publishers in Chicago. So it's my wife, who I married almost 20 years ago. She's from Chicago. That's why I'm up here. But we're thinking about moving back to Florida because I hate the winter.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's probably really cold right now.
stinky, nasty cold outside, and it snowed last week, and fortunately, it got up to 50 yesterday, and so all the snow's melted, and I'm happy about that. And we're going to get more snow later next week, so
Yeah.
But
it'd be short lived. Yeah.
yeah. So so for me, it was always freelance stuff. For people like Dave Stevens, they're right there in LA. They can just reach out and get those jobs, left and right. And production companies usually like to have people that can work right there in LA to be able to deliver quickly. So
It seems like kind of the art meccas of the US are either LA or New York City.
yeah, pretty much, and that's the way it's always been, because that's where publishers in New York and film in LA. So that's where the sort of culture of art grew in those places. There's other places. I mean, Chicago here has the Art Institute and some major museums and schools. So it's a fairly big thing here. Like Alex Ross, who's big in the industry, he went to the Art Institute downtown Chicago here. So there's places, but nowadays with the internet and digital files and instant communication, you don't really need to live close to publishers or production houses anymore. You can pretty much live anywhere.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people now, like they'll be in South America and they'll just like digitally send it in to DC or Marvel, whoever.
Yeah, and that's good for the publishers, because no longer needed to stay within certain geographical boundaries. There's lots of beautiful art being done all around the world, and it's nice to be able to see a lot of that, and have access to it too. I buy a lot of European graphic novels and languages I can't read, but I love the artwork. So FedEx makes that really easy. The internet makes it real easy to see what's being sold, in Amazon France and Amazon Italy, and just get on the computer, order some books, and a week later they're here. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I noticed it. Well, there's also some people have complained to me and they say, "Hey, well, by outsourcing, they can pay less because like the standard of living might be lower somewhere, so it's more money and it's less money if I live in like New York City."
Right, and there's more competition that way too.
Yeah.
I mean, you broaden the horizons of where you can hire. It's certainly artists in different areas and different conditions don't have to charge as much, can charge less, and certainly companies are looking to save money. I mean, back in the 70s and early 80s, both Marvel and DC, went down to the Philippines and snapped up a whole lot of really good artists back then. And you saw a lot of Filipino artists coming into the American comic industry and really, started changing the look of comics a little bit, because they have a different standard of the way they approach comics back in Southeast Asia. So it was really interesting to see.
I noticed that you were talking about. I read maybe it's your Wikipedia page, but you were talking about how you're more interested in doing covers for things rather than like storyboard illustrations.
Right.
Like I think you left the school early because that's that wasn't for you and went somewhere else.
Yeah, I went to 1 year at the Joe Kubert School in New Jersey, which is for those of you who know who Joe Kubert is, he's one of the masters of comic arts, and he was around for years and years and years. He passed away a few years back, but he started the school to be able to teach comic artists. It's something that specifically wasn't being done. You had schools that focused on arts in general, but there were artists like me and Ron Randall and Jan Dersma and Tom Mandrake and Steve Bissett, and a whole lot of people came out of the Kubert School over the years, who just wanted to draw comics, and there was no way for them to learn in sort of an organized way. So Joe started the school, and I went there in the second year of the school. This would be 1979, and I just started to teach myself how to paint, and I really loved painting. But what got me into painting was comics, and I really loved creating comics. And so I went to the school and spent a year there. And at that point, during that year, I found I was happier creating single illustrations rather than continuous panel, 6 panel per page, telling a story through all of those. I was happier creating one image that sort of told a story, which falls right into my interest in painting, that's what painting is creating, a painting to tell a story. And so at the end of the year, Joe Kubert, who was, he had his studio in the school, so he was there all the time. And so, with him running it, we had a talk at the end of the school year. And he said he knew that I was painting. He saw my painting during the year as well, and he knew that that's really where I wanted to go. So he just encouraged me to he literally said, "We don't have anything else that we can teach you here at the school, Dave. We know, I know that you want to paint, and that's something we can't teach you." So I dropped out and just taught myself how to paint. And if I would have stayed at the school, and really learned more about continuous panel, and maybe have developed a love for it, maybe things would have been different. But Joe, he was a smart guy, and he saw that that's where my love was painting, and just encouraged me to follow my path, and I did. And I've stayed in touch with the school, the people at the school over the years, and we talk, and I see a lot of alumni, at shows, and it was really worth it, and I think it's a good thing for the industry. And it's still running now. It's a much bigger program now. Back then, it was just pencil inks, flat color and lettering, and now it runs the gamut from animation to 3D artwork, computer generated artwork, and traditional comics. So it's a much bigger school now.
One of my favorite guys that came out of there, the guy that made me want to go to that school, was John Tolbin. And I thought I loved his artwork, both as a storyboard artist and as a painter. I thought he was a really good painter. I guess that was something he brought to the Kubert School.
He was actually in my class. And so I got to know him through, just hanging out with him in school and after school. And he was really talented. He still is talented. Unfortunately, he has some eye problems, some vision problems, and so he's not able to have that output. But he was creatively amazing. The style that he chose worked perfectly for the illustrations he wanted to create. And like you say, he could handle pencil and inks and painting. And he is very talented. And unfortunately, that was cut short, with his illness. But he's still with us, and I've seen him at a couple of shows, just coming and signing books and stuff. And he's still got a good attitude towards things, but unfortunately he can't draw or paint much anymore. But John was one of the good guys.
Yeah, no, he's really talented. I'm glad to hear he's still with us, even if he's not putting out as much anymore. I've noticed that, I interviewed Donato Giancola. I don't know if you're aware of him, but
he's a friend. Yeah,
but when he first went to art school and then he moved to New York to get a job, He wasn't getting a job right away, and I know that he went to a lot of galleries and like he looked at stuff like how old masters approached it, and
Right.
I feel like he kind of has that feel. Like, some people they go more towards illustration, and some people go more towards that kind of like old masters feel. I don't think that one is better than the other. I mean, they're just different formats.
Right. No, it's a personal choice. Obviously, I mean, you can look at Donato's work and see that he is very influenced by the old master style of painting. I consider myself an illustrator. I don't consider myself, a painter. I'm an illustrator. Donato is definitely a pure painter, and he uses a lot of the techniques that the masters use. The way that he lays out his preliminary work and his underpainting and then his overpainting and lighting and such. He really has that talent and that desire to create imagery within that sort of old master style look, but still be modern, in his approach and visually to the material. Whereas I took a different, path in that Frazetta and Boris and Michael Whalen and all, those guys during James Bama, who did the Duck Savage covers, those were all influences in my painting, up through the late 70s and early 80s. And then I started to get more involved in illustrators from the 20s and 30s, Dean Cornwell and NC Wyeth and Frank Schoonover and to some extent Norman Rockwell, who was still doing stuff into the 70s, and then moving into other illustration artists such as Richard Amsel and Drew Struzan, who were doing just fabulous movie poster illustration. And so all of those influenced me to the point where that's why I consider myself an illustrator rather than a painter, because I don't use the traditional techniques of painting. I utilize a lot of different, more 20th century, 21st century ways of incorporating, elements into my artwork that makes it less traditional and more illustrative.
Well, I remember when I went to art school, my teacher was telling me it's pretty much snobbery between the designation of illustrator and artist, because they told me for instance Geiger, he was like well respected until they used one of his paintings in that Ridley Scott movie Alien, and then suddenly he was demoted to illustrator.
Right. Yeah, it's a whole goofy thing, and every business is like that. But in the art, you have a lot of ego, and it's not just in film production, but in just the gallery world and in New York or Paris or Italy. It's all about egos and money, and they like to rank each other. Blah 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 blah. I feel that the art is the thing. I paint to please myself first, because I have to be happy with it before I can give it to a client. But I'm trying to make the client happy as well. So what anybody else thinks of what I do, that's up to them. I'm certainly happy that I have a lot of fans around the world that enjoy what I do. But as far as being compared or ranked to other artists, that's a pissing match between gallery owners and and the money people. I don't care, and I think a lot of people in our industry don't really care about that either. It's the love of the work.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. It's also like the final say so is how good does the product look? And
Right.
I think you can't deny someone with talent to present or something. I noticed that you tend to make stuff like going with the illustrated look like a little more dynamic, like so does Frazetta, and some people do it more like more stoic, more like like
Yeah.
capture scene. Is that something you actually go for to make it flow and make it pop out?
Sometimes, I mean, the project usually specifies what the image should be. So if it's an adventure thing, yeah, it should be a little bit more dynamic. If it's a character piece, then more subdued piece. You know, color has to do with it. Composition has to do with it. Um, uh, but it's commercial art for me in my career. It's to sell a product. I'm hired by whatever company to produce a piece of art that's going to sell their product. So if you want to knock it down into specific language, I do advertising art. Because it's something that people see and should bring them to the product. But you know,
All right, well,
um,
that's not necessarily short. You've done some amazing work.
yeah, and because I love what I do, and I don't want to cut short my responsibility to the publishers or whatever commercial aspect I'm working with, just because it's commercial or whatever. I want to give a good piece of work. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I want to keep that quality up as best I can. So every project has its qualifications. So I talk with the publisher or the company, and I ask them what they want, and then that'll direct me into whether making it more dynamic, or more stoic, or more heroic, or more dramatic, darker, um, more vibrant. If it's really action oriented, fire and red, uh, things like that. So yeah, it's something that I've learned over the years, that you have to be flexible. If an artist is doing something over and over and over again, even though that it looks really good, but it's really um, uh, uh, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's not passive, but it's
Repetitive.
repetitive. Yeah, that's a good word. Then the interest in the viewer who follows that person's work is gonna wane, because they tend to expect what they've seen before. And so I always try to approach every new piece with a new eye. Now, I've been doing this for 40 years, so it's not to say that every piece is unique, but I try. And there are some things, like when I did Dark Empire, Star Wars, with Dark Horse. There you have 6 covers featuring the same characters. Luke, Leia, Han, Chewbacca, R2D2, C3PO, and whatever the villain is for that particular issue. So you're limited to what you can do with those characters, but you're not really limited to what you can do with the covers. So I made a conscious effort, because I knew I was doing 6 covers. I made a conscious effort to have a color palette for each different cover. So the first one was brown and warms, and the second one was blues. The third one was aqua, but they screwed up the printing, so it turned out to be like this really heavy lime green. I was really disappointed with that color. And the fourth one was purples and blues, so I planned it out so that each cover was a different color, and that way I could make sure that when it was on the stands, someone who bought number one would come to the comic stand and see a different Star Wars comic, but not see a similar cover. They would see something completely different, completely tonally different, but they see that Star Wars logo and they'd know it would be a new issue. So things like that, go through your head when you're doing consecutive work for the same type of product. A lot of professional, artists in my position think ahead like that, but some don't. And, that's why you get a lot of repetitive looking covers, especially with comics, because most of the time the colorists are handed, a black and white line drawing, and they're asked to color it. Well, they don't really take into consideration what's gone on before. They'll just color it like the way they think it's dynamic, and that can get lost month after month, and you lose sales that way. And so that's just part, a small part of the consider that I do.
So I noticed that you use like a more wide color palette than a lot of people do. Like people stick with like various tones that are like super close together, and you use a more diverse palette, like kind of like Presenter does as well. Was that a conscious intention of yours?
Yeah, it was a conscious decision on my part. Being a commercial artist, you want art that jumps off the page or off the book or off the comic to grab the people's attention, because they're looking at a book in a bookstore that there's 100 other books around it, or they're looking at the comic stand and there's 100 other comics around it. So you want something that jumps out a little bit more. And so I decided early on in my career, being a commercial artist, I want to have that recognition when it's on the stands. So even though I started to learn to paint more in a traditional fashion, which is a little bit more subtle in its color, I started incorporating more pure color into my paintings because they tended to attract the eye a little bit easier. So I just started to use brighter colors. I paint in oils. So oils right out of the tube have a vibrancy that's just really dynamic. And so I learned to paint without really adding a whole lot to the tube color unless it was called for. In the traditional fashion, you don't do that. You're always mixing colors, and they tend to get muddy, or they tend to lose the vibrancy, and that fits that style of painting. But for illustration, you want something that's going to grab you right away when you see it. And so, yeah, I made that conscious decision to incorporate more vibrant colors into the illustrations.
Okay, the next question I had for you was I noticed that both you and Donato have like a slightly different approach than like say I learned in art school, which is like you will draw it on like I think like correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like it's like a hard piece of paper, you will draw it and then you will like layer in like the kind of like the foundation of it, and then you'll build up from there.
Yeah, that's a traditional way of doing it. Is you lay down the drawing first, and then you put on a sepia or an umber underpainting, so you get your values of darks and lights, and then you start painting on top of that, adding color, deepening the shadows, building up sort of layers of color until you get to your finished layer. And that's a very traditional way. That's the way most art teachers will teach you how to paint. That's the traditional way that Donato learned to paint. And if you go to YouTube or anywhere that has that type of demonstration, you'll see that it's a very time consuming way of doing it, but it leads to a very polished, nicely rendered painting.
No, I think it produces great results. I've seen
Yeah.
both with your work, with Jonathan's work. I was just wondering, the not even the medium, but the canvas that you put it on, is it mostly like kind of like stiff paper? Or is it
Okay, yeah. Well, it depends on the project, really. I learned early on. I was painting on canvas when I started because I thought that was the traditional way an artist painted. And as soon as I started taking my artwork around to publishers, they said stop painting on canvas and paint on illustration board, which is basically a thick paper. It's let's see if I got a sample here that I can show you real quick. So it's a piece of paper that's mounted on a cardboard, so it's stiff. And the reason that art directors like that is because there's no texture to it. The canvas, when it's photographed, a canvas painting will show little canvasy texture underneath the paint. And art directors don't like to see that. They like to see a clean image. So I switched to painting on the illustration board. But one of the things you have to do with oil paints, with acrylics, you don't have to worry about it so much because you can paint directly on paper with acrylics because it's water based. You can use watercolor, color pencil, acrylics, and that's fine. But when you're painting with oils, oil needs something to adhere to hold to. So I coat the board with what's called gesso, and that is it's basically a white acrylic, but it has marble dust in it, so it has a little bit of tooth to it. And you just paint over it, with a house painting brush, and it seals the paper, but gives a really good foundation to work on. So I'll have that blank white gessoed board, and I'll do my drawing on it, and then I'll spray fix the drawing. And then I don't do an underpainting with sepia tones or umber. I basically just start throwing, color paint right on it. And then I build up my painting from there. So I basically cut out a step that traditional artists tend to use. If you look at Alex Ross, he goes in with a gray underpainting before he starts his watercolor acrylics, on top of that. That's a very traditional way too. But for me, I have my line drawing, and then it's sort of paint by numbers. I just start throwing paint inside, where my lines are, and just start, painting. That's just the way I've always done it. Because I taught myself, I don't have that traditional, background. And so I just learned how to throw the paint on the board and make it work for what I need.
Do you think it's when you gesso the board, do you think it's better if you gesso it by hand? Because I remember we used to like gesso stuff. You take like the top of a cassette tape cover and you just scrape it to make it level. And now you just use a spray. Do you find one better than the other?
That's really a personal thing between the artist and his materials. I have been doing it for 40 years, so I won't use anything else but the way that I put it down, which is right out of the tube. I just I got my acrylic. I just squeeze some on. I take my house painting brush and I brush it over to make sure the whole thing's covered, and that's it. If I need a texture, I'll just take the brush and I'll sort of mush it into the gesso so it makes sort of a texture to it, and then I'll let that dry, and then the texture will be solid. But if I want it smooth, I just brush it smooth like you're painting a wall in your house. I've tried, the spray gesso. It leaves a bit of a tooth to it, which I don't particularly care for. A lot of artists who use gesso tend to sand it to make it very smooth, and then do a second coat and then sand that. I don't. I like the tooth that the plain gesso, puts on. So, I don't do anything additional to it. I just I just put it on, and then once it's dry, I start with the drawing. So, you know, it's one of the things that people ask. How can you deliver an oil painting in 2 or 3 days, finished, dry, and ready to go? Well, that's one of the reasons I don't do a whole lot of preliminary stuff. When I'm working on the drawing, I'm painting it in my head. I'm figuring out where everything goes. And so by the time the drawing's finished, I have a good idea of what it's going to look like. So I cut out all of these preliminary, pieces. I do the drawing, then I go right into the painting. I don't fool around really. And you know, that's
I
just the way I
remember
work.
hearing that Frazetta would it would be due the next day, and like that night he would be, hey, I don't have a canvas. He would tear wood off the wall and he'd paint on that and get it done.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's urban legend or if that's actually true.
Oh, I think it's stretching it a little bit. He painted in oils, and so you need some drying time with that. But that's drying time. That's not painting time.
Right.
I've studied his work, long enough over the course of my career, and I think that I have. Nobody's ever had a video of him painting, but I can look at his work and see what he's doing. And he worked very quickly. He did this underpainting very, very quickly with just really blacks and shadows, and then he came on with the paint and he just sort of worked the paint in with that, and just kept moving. He knew exactly what he wanted and where he wanted it, and so yeah, he painted very quick. He didn't put out many of those in 2 days, but it's a good story. But I think there's a lot of leeway you need to give with that. But he certainly, no matter how fast he worked, he made it look like he didn't take any shortcuts. He put everything in it that needed to be in it to tell that story.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his work. All right, I have two more questions. I don't want to keep you here all day.
Okay.
One is I remember I did a painting seminar with somebody who uses I use terpenoid, and I thin stuff down, and he was using all sorts of oils and drying mediums and stuff. He's like, yeah, well, terpenoid is not going to make it last as long. I never heard that before.
Here's my advice on materials. The materials that you can get go from very low quality to very high quality, and the range of prices can go from very low to very high. But you can't say that something of very high quality has to be a high price, and you can't say that something very low quality has to be a low price. Some of the lower quality stuff is very high priced and it's garbage, and some of the high quality stuff is very low priced and it's really, really good. So what I suggest is spend a little bit of money on the mid-range stuff and see what works. And if it doesn't, then try some lower stuff. I found out, because I used to buy acrylics. The oil paints I buy everything from the $3 or $4 a tube, at Hobby Lobby, up to $15-18 a tube at Dick Blick. It just depends on what color I need and what the manufacturer is. How dense the pigment is inside the tube with the oil. But I have 40 years of experience knowing what I'm looking for. But about 20 years ago, I started painting with acrylics, and I thought, okay, well, I'll buy some, really nice acrylics. And I bought some really nice acrylics, and they were fine. But then I'm walking through Michael's, and I get to the craft aisle, and I see these little tubes. Oops, give me a sec. I see these little tubes. You can see how small they are of craft acrylic, and it just says acrylic on it, but it's not made for painters. It's made for craft people.
Right.
But it's a liquid acrylic, so it's the same type of paint. It may not be the highest quality paint, but it's the same type of paint. And these bottles come in like 100 different colors. So you don't have to mix a whole lot of colors. And these are like $1.50. And so, I started working with them, and they did just as good as a tube that was $5 or $6. And so I've been using these little tubes of acrylic for years and years and years. And it's cheap, and it's everywhere. And for what I use it for, it does exactly the same as anything that's twice as expensive or 10 times more expensive. So the choice of materials is really up to the experience of theirs. I use Terpenoid. I use it because it's non it doesn't have an odor.
You don't go crazy.
Yeah, no, don't go crazy. But my studio has a lot of non-odorous stuff, so my studio doesn't really smell like a typical artist studio, other than the fragrance of the oil and the linseed oil that's in the tubes of paint themselves. So people don't really get that. If they came in blindfolded, they wouldn't know that this was an artist studio. But Terpenoid, it cleans brushes, it thins out paint. That's all you need it for. I used to use smelly, regular turpentine till I found this, and it worked the same. It just didn't stink up the house. What else? We got. So I use liquid, which is an additive to the paint. I have a little bit of it on my drawing table in a jar, and I just dip my brush into it a little bit and then put it in with the oil paint. It'll thin the oil paint down, but it'll also help it dry very, very quickly. So I've been using that for 30 years when I found out that. And that's another reason why I can paint so quick and have it dry so quick is I can put on paint. 3 hours later, it'll be dry. An oil paint, it'll be dry. And then I can paint on top of it. And then
liquid dries it fast. It's a fast drying agent.
It's a fast drying agent. And then someone just gave me this as a birthday gift. This Gamblin solvent free, so it won't stink. Fluid that's basically the same thing, except this is more liquidy. This is more of like a gummy.
Right. I've used both, yeah.
More liquidy. So this has been around for years. I've been using this, but never thought of using this. And then somebody gave it to me. And it works fine. It's more fluid. So if I need to do some very fine line work or very small detail, this is much better. So I have sets of alcohol markers that when I'm working on something and I need a line or something on the painting, I'll just take a marker and I'll root, and it dries immediately, and then I can keep moving on. So I tell artists, when they talk about what they're using and ask me what I'm using, I use whatever is available, and I don't care how cheap it is, as long as it gives me what I need. The cheaper the better, because I can buy more of it. They ask me, what brushes do I use? I buy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask as the next one.
Yeah, I buy $3 and $4, cheap brushes at Dick Blick. Let me see here. So, Dick Blick has this blue Scholastic. I really like these a lot. and these are probably the cheapest that Dick Blick has. And so I use these quite a lot. I go in and I buy, 10 at a time, of different sizes. And I go through, 2 or 3 a painting. I like these a lot. So that's really cheap. You don't need to buy a $10 brush when you can buy a $4 brush. And then, giving a store a plug that everybody might laugh about. Hobby Lobby, Master's Touch. I don't know if there we go. There we go, Master's Touch. These brushes are really, really good. And they're really cheap when you can get them 40% off, which is like every 2 weeks. Hobby Lobby has them for 40% off. So, I go and I buy like 10 or 15 brushes at a time. And I just love these brushes. And because they're so cheap, I can basically destroy them, as I'm painting. I'm always like pushing things in and scrubbing it around. And I go through brushes, fairly quickly. But I'm not worried that, it's a $20 brush and I'm going to ruin a $20 brush. So I buy the cheap brushes that give me exactly what I want. And I've bought expensive brushes, and they end up in this jar over here that I don't use. The material that the artists use shouldn't be decided on by the quality that somebody else says the quality is. Right. It's your work. You choose what you want to work with.
It's kind of a rule for life.
Yeah, and experimentation is good. If you see something, give it a try. If it's working, stay with it. But it doesn't hurt to move out a little bit. When I started using those little tubes of craft paint, that was like a light bulb going off in my head. Why didn't I know that before? Artists don't know that. They go to the art material section, and you see the big Liquitex tubes. You see these things,
right.
And
that's what I have.
Yeah, and you sort of think that's all there is, but it's not. There's more. So sometimes just look around. You never know what you're going to find.
Mostly for oil paint, I buy Rembrandt paints, which is I was always told they're the best student quality you can buy. So unless you want to spend that like crazy $30 a tube, which I don't see the difference.
Right.
What do you prefer?
I like Grumbacher. I like Winsor Newton. They have different values. The Winsor Newtons are more of a student grade, which means there's more oil than pigment, and the Winsor Newton brand has more pigment, and I prefer more pigment rather than a more runny paint. So that's primarily what I look for, is a nice thick paint. And believe it or not, we're going to go back to Hobby Lobby and these master touches, which they're just solid with pigment. It really surprised me when I bought a couple of these and found them to be very dense, which I just love. And they're cheap. There's like $5.99 for this at 40% off. You're looking at $4 for a big tube. I'm in on that. And so that's what I use a lot right now. But I also have Grumbachers and Winsor Newtons, and actually I've bought a bunch of Utrecht, which is Dick Blick brand um, oils, because they're fairly cheap. Um, so yeah, I've just learned over the years which paints have better pigment to oil ratio, and so those are the ones that I usually buy because that's what I look for. But occasionally I'll get just a garbage tube. I bought a tube of it might have been Winsor Newton, but I put some on my palette, and like the oil just ran right out of it, and I said no, they did something wrong there at the factory, and so it was like a $5 tube. I just tossed it out and got a new one. But that happens. But yeah, it just comes with experience. But I would say try to, and when you go to Dick Blick, they have sort of their levels and little signs saying, this is a good student range, paint, and this is the intermediary range, and this is the high range. Stay away from the student. The intermediary is probably good enough for what the average, good, painter artist would use. The expensive ones might be good. I just don't go into that category because I don't think $15 for a tube of paint is worth. Well, it might be worth it to some people because, and it's probably worth it to me. I can let me show you. See this tube of paint?
Yes.
I've had for about 30 years. And it still got paint in it. And I bought it for like $4. So, $4 over 30 years is like, what, 20 cents a year or something. So, if I would have bought this at $20,
which it might be nowadays.
Well, no. Funny story. Liquitex oil.
Right.
I used a lot of that until I couldn't find it anymore. And I called Liquitex and they said, our factory burnt down. We're not making oils anymore. They still make acrylics,
right?
But they make oils. Yeah, so I mean, $15 for a tube of paint, $20 for a tube of paint. Yeah. It would last me 20 years. So that's $1 a year for a tube of paint. But I'm looking at it saying, okay, here's $15 for a tube of paint. I can buy, 4 brushes for that.
I think I've noticed it seems like you need like a little bit tighter and stronger brushes for like pen and ink illustration than for painting, because with painting, like the paint will obviously clump into like a sharp point, whereas like the ink isn't thick enough to hold it there.
Well, yeah, ink and ink brushes are a little bit different because inks can be different viscosities, and brushes can be made very different. You'll find that a lot of really good traditional inkers or artists that do pencil and ink have the same brush that they've used for 20 or 30 years, just because the quality of it was so good and it came to such a nice point that they've every time they finish using it, they'll sort of twist it so that point stays very, very sharp. So once again, that's a personal thing, but inkers tend to not buy a whole lot of brushes because they take good care. Once they find one that's like golden, they'll keep that forever. For me, I don't have that with brushes. I utilize them for what they're used for. Put the paint on the board and move it to where the paint should be, and then once it starts frazzing, it's in the garbage.
Do you use fan brushes or filbert brushes at all?
I do a little bit, but they're more for smoothing rather than actual painting. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of lightly brushing over to blend a color or take a brush stroke out or something like that. Um, uh, I use um, I use makeup brushes a lot for that. Makeup brushes tend to be very, very soft. And so if I'm laying down something where I don't want any brush strokes in it, I'll just take a big makeup brush and just sort of lightly brush over the paint, and that just
Yeah, that's a great tip. Yeah.
yeah blends all of those brush strokes flat. So people look at my art and they say that doesn't look like an oil painting. Well, it's not traditional oil painting because I'm taking the look of the oil out of it when I'm brushing out all these brush strokes and making it flat.
Okay, last question. You've done a lot of stuff. You did stuff for Predator, you did stuff for Alien, you did stuff for Star Wars, you did stuff for Indiana Jones. Um,
Right.
are there any other big franchises that you did stuff for that I'm leaving out here?
Not really. I've been very fortunate to have been in a spot where I've been able to either reach out to companies and say I'd be interested in it, or have them come to me and say, we've seen you do this other type of thing. Can you do it for us? And I've been a movie fan since before I was an artist. So, to be involved in a lot of those licenses over the years, and I'm still doing them to this day. I've been very fortunate in my career to have that much fun doing something uh, I would have loved anyway, but I get to share it with everybody. Um, my love of art and my love of movies combining into being able to do this is just really um, it's satisfying for me, and I'm happy that the fans who have followed me over the years really enjoy it as well.
Do you have one thing that you prefer that's like the most fun to paint or the most fun to illustrate?
Well, after 40 years of doing a lot of stuff and really concentrating on my commercial work, um, I enjoy doing it all because it's always a challenge. But now that I'm 40 years into it and sort of slowing down in my commercial work, I've been doing a lot of painting for myself, and so uh, I've really been enjoying doing that because I don't have an art director or looking over my shoulder. I don't have an editor or anybody saying you can't do this, do it this way, or add that color. I'm just doing that for myself, and that's really what I'm enjoying right now.
What are you working on for yourself? Like, what are your private projects?
Uh, they're just sort of all over the boards. It's just really weird stuff that well, not weird in the subject matter, but weird for me, um, and the expectation that my fans have. I like painting, old rusty locomotives. So that's not aliens or Batman, uh, but it's something that I've enjoyed over the years. There's a lot of texture and a lot of lights and composition and lights and darks and just all sorts of really fun stuff that's fun to just get into when I'm working on the painting. And you'll see some of that in my career over all this time. You'll see little bits of things that I've enjoyed that I've incorporated into Alien or Indiana Jones or whatever. But right now, it's like, two or three commercial pieces and then two or three of stuff for myself. So if you follow me on Facebook, Dave Dorman Artist, uh, Facebook, you'll get to see a lot of that type of material that I'm doing for myself. It may not be for everybody, but because it's very subdued, it's not fantasy, science fiction, horror, or superhero, but it's fun. It's fun for me, and so that's a lot of what I'm doing right now. So it's about 50% commercial stuff, still doing superheroes, and fantasy stuff, and then 50% of me, painting pretty girls standing in front of an old rusty train.
Yeah, I looked at your Facebook and like some like starting from the very beginning, drawing and building it up. It looked pretty instructive. Do you want to give any shout outs to anything people should look at, like website, YouTube, TikTok,
Uh,
you do little videos?
well, no, all of that stuff is, I think, going to come in 2023. I've been thinking about doing a little TikTok thing, talking about what materials I use and how I prepare things, and just showing books that have been influenced, artists that have been influenced on me, and stuff. So I may do that. The YouTube thing, I may be switching. Well, let's start with Facebook. Facebook, I've been doing for about 2 years of live painting, and a lot of that's archives. So if people want to go and see how I paint, they should be able to just get to my Facebook, like say Dave Dorman artist, and then go into the archive and see some of me painting. And I want to continue that. Uh, Facebook limits my page to 5,000, so I'd like to get a broader audience, and so I've been looking at possibly doing a YouTube channel and getting a broader audience with that. Um, and then the TikTok thing, I think, is a good way to reach out in a smaller format where I don't have to spend a lot of time, uh, you know, actually doing something. I can explain it and show samples and things. And then I'm hoping to put out a book next year, a collection of art. Um,
Do
hopefully
you have
for
a
this.
name for that yet?
Yeah, right now tentatively it's oil and water,
Yeah, okay.
uh, because I paint in oils, and then people don't understand how I can paint in acrylics on top of oils, but that's a water medium, so it's oil and water. And I explain a lot of that sometimes in those instructional videos is how I do that. People still don't get it, but I do it anyway. So yeah, so it'll probably be oil and water. It may be Rolling Thunder. Follow up with the book that came out about 6 or 7 years ago. With new artwork. But as soon as I decide what that's going to be, I'll let everybody know, and probably do a Kickstarter on it, and generate some interest. I guess, I don't know.
And it'll be available on Amazon and basically wherever books are sold.
Should be, yep. If I plan it properly, it will be. Um, so I'm going to take some time to do that. So we'll see. But that the book will be Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Aliens, Batman, a little bit of everything,
Kind
including,
of a retrospective of your work.
yeah, kind of not necessarily a retrospective, but sort of an umbrella look at a lot of the fun things I've done, as well as some of the newer things that nobody's ever seen. Some of the things I'm doing for myself that might surprise people or might bore people. Who knows?
And what's up? I went to your website and like a lot of the links are down and stuff. Is that something you want to reinvigorate, or you want to focus more on the Facebook?
The website I'm gonna take down and redo to be just a sort of small contact website, and then, I mean, it's easier for me to link, Dave Dorman on Google if people want to see my art, than it is to have them go through 3 or 4 different links on my website. Um, I think that the website will end up just being a single page that has links to YouTube and Facebook and all these other places that I do business with. I'm going to have a Shopify page up that'll have my posters and comic books and things that I've done covers for. That'll be up sometime in January as well.
So people can do a print of your artwork.
Yeah, so they can order prints of my artwork. I'll have Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Aliens, and then I'll have a section where I'll show different types of art. That I have a really nice printer in the studio that I can do nice giclée prints of, so that people just want to order one. They don't have to. They can just pick an image of what they want from the page, and I can just print it and send it out to them. So yeah, there's going to be some interesting things coming up, and it all ties back in with me being an old guy, and sort of ready to not semi-retire, but sort of shift my focus from commercial artwork to my own artwork, and make that go financially with some other things that I'm doing.
Okay, well, awesome, Dave. Great to hear from you. Thank you very much for doing this.